Shana Tova, and thank you to Rabbi Berg for offering me the opportunity today to offer some personal thoughts on the theme of Malkhuyot. The Malkhuyot section of our prayer focuses on God's sovereignty over the universe. And frankly, in normal times, at this point in the davening, I'm thinking less of God's sovereignty over the universe and more about when lunch is going to roll around. What's more, the Malkhuyot prayer itself seems deeply out of touch to the modern ear. After all, the root word for Malkhuyot is melech, or king, and kings are hardly the example of just sovereignty in our society today. But I hope that I can convince you in a few minutes that Malkhuyot is more nuanced than it might appear on its first blush, because underneath these discussions of kings and kingship are three critical values that underpin our notions of justice. First, the inherent equality of every individual. Second, that sovereignty flows from the individual up rather than from the ruler down. And third, that equal justice is necessarily linked to accountability. Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, the 20th century rabbi, used to tell a story about when he was growing up in Russia as a child and he was learning about the Malkhuyot service. His teacher told him that it was a coronation and asked him who was being coronated. Soloveitchik answered with the only thing he knew, the Tsar of Russia. His teacher laughed and told him that in fact it was a coronation of God, and who, his teacher continued, was undertaking this prayer of coronation. The teacher responded, Yunkel the tailor, Beryl the shoemaker, Zalman the water carrier. This story captures what Rabbi Jonathan Sacks has called the radical democratization of Jewish theology, the idea that every person, regardless of wealth, power, station, or status, has an equal moral worth, and that sovereignty therefore flows from the individual up rather from the ruler down. Indeed, we find this even in our most basic prayer structure, the minyan. It takes 10 individuals of co-equal worth to be able to assemble together to say prayers, Kaddish, and read the Torah. The text of Malkhuyot itself supports this notion of egalitarianism. There are only 3 times the Torah refers to God as a melech, as a king, and the most extensive reference is found on page 156 of our Machzor, Adonai Elohim utruat melech bo. Our Machzor translates these lines as, Adonai, their God, is with them, and their sovereign's acclaim is in their midst. But that's not actually what the Hebrew itself literally says. The sentence is written in the singular, not in the plural. So it's more accurately translated, God is with him, and the call of the sovereign is in his midst. That is, each individual has her or his own inherent moral worth and an independent claim to dignity. That means that each individual has the call of sovereignty inside themselves, and that legitimacy flows from these individuals up, not from the ruler down. Perhaps that's why the prophet Amos speaks of justice flowing like water rather than burning like fire. After all, water is made up of many co-equal drops, whereas fire is the result of a single spark. Now, what are the implications for justice when sovereignty comes from co-equal individuals rather than from the top down? There are, I believe, at least 2. First, justice itself must be equal, without regard to wealth or status, race or politics. Any system that privileges some over others cannot legitimately claim that it derives its authority from all. Second, it means that our system of justice must be accountable to the people from which it derives its sovereignty. Justice has to be of the people, by the people, and for the people. Now, this isn't to say that these ideas have been fully realized in Judaism or in America today. After all, the same Torah that contains this egalitarianism also supports slavery, just as the same declaration that proclaimed equality also excluded women and slaves. And as we so tragically see in our time, our own system of justice repeatedly falls short of fully realizing our ideals of equality and accountability. But these tragic failures do not undermine the fundamental truths of the ideals themselves. That we fall short doesn't absolve us of our obligation to work to bring these ideals closer to reality. As the Mishnah tells us, it is not our responsibility to finish the work, but we are not free to desist from it either. And that is what Malkhuyot is a reminder of, that this call for justice is within each of us, that sovereignty flows from the individual up, not from the ruler down, and that we must all work harder to make the reality of our justice system reflect our ideals of equality and accountability. May next year bring us a year of health and peace. Shana Tova.